Welcome to the Renegade Report. I'm Jonathan.
And Roman Kabanak is present. And it is Friday, and we still don't know the results of the elections.
Well, we don't. Are you surprised?
Well, no.
I mean, what has to happen is the elections get tallied by the IEC. They then go to Zweli Mkhize's desk. Zweli Mkhize has a look over them, decides whether he likes them. If he likes them a lot, he sends them to Jessie Duarte's desk. She decides if she likes them and ultimately signs them off, sends them back to the IEC, after which the Open Society Foundation and other non-profits will then tell them that they really ran a great election, and then they will be released from it.
But what happens
That's the process.
What happens if Jessie Duarte thinks there wasn't enough rigging? What happens then?
Well, then they fiddle with the numbers a little bit. Those districts that are unreported or not fully reported yet, you know, the ones that are 79% or 82%, the ones where, for example, your party had people tell them, I physically voted there and it's reflecting 0. They just fiddle a little bit with those numbers, and then you know, they end up where they need to be.
But thankfully, Cyril will have a mandate. And, you know, this will be a thing of the past. Free and fair elections will continue.
Yes.
For the foreseeable future.
For the record, I mean, we don't think that the elections were stolen. They were largely free and fair.
No, voters just were dumb, or are dumb. Whichever way.
Which is what you've been saying for many years.
I know, and that sort of proves it this time, doesn't it?
I must excuse my voice. I'm a little bit sick, but we're bringing you a podcast nevertheless.
We sound like twins now.
Except I didn't suffer through burns and 3 months in ICU, but yeah. So let's
don't
call
appropriate my injuries. That's what I'm asking. But anyway, the guest today is, and he's a returning guest. I think
he is, but he's returning from a long time ago.
I think you've been on once before.
That's right.
Jason Werbeloff, sci-fi author, philosopher, and thinks groups don't exist.
That's right.
And we should trash the earth. We'll get there.
Right, I forgot about that. Yeah.
That's my favorite part, man. It's my favorite part of Jason.
So quickly, just let's have a little rundown why groups don't exist, Jason, because I agree with you completely, but I think the average person will think you completely weird.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of expecting that question, a quick why don't groups exist? And I don't have a quick answer. The question I would ask you is why you think groups do exist. And then I would try to break down your answer.
Well, I mean, I know your argument well because I've read your thesis and I agree with it. So I don't think groups exist.
I convinced one.
Yeah.
Okay,
this was like 5 years ago, Jason.
I think the common refrain would be for someone to look at their own grouping and then to say, well, how can you say groups don't exist? I'm a Jew, and, you know, when I go to synagogue, there's a whole bunch of other Jews and they consider themselves part of a group. Or I just voted for the EFF, and, you know, we're a group that see ourselves as the same. Or we are Afrikaners and we've been treated like shit for the last 5-6 years, had our language stolen from us at universities and shit like that. So we voted for the FF plus, and we're clearly a group. So you know, that's, I think, the argument that gets given.
So it's about self-identifying as a group.
Yeah, I think people identify as a thing, and then they notice that other people also identify as that thing.
And they assume it's the same thing.
And, well, they say that gives them something in common, and if you put a whole bunch of people with that thing in common together, it makes a group, at least in that sense.
Right. Okay. So it's so interesting you've used those examples. So long before I studied philosophy and took this very seriously, I grew up in a Jewish family, and I went to King David and grew up in a Jewish school with all the trappings of Jewish identity. My parents keep kosher at home, Shabbos every Friday night. It's Friday today. I might go over to Shabbos just now.
Bad Jew.
And I did my matric speech on why I don't think Jews exist. So I've
at King David.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they must have your name up in lights.
Yeah, definitely went up on a board somewhere. So you know, it's interesting that you used that example. Also the example of the EFF. So when I did my thesis, the big political party on campus at Wits, where I did my PhD, was the ANC Youth League. So the ANC Youth League was protesting and was waving these banners and these flags and chanting and creating all sorts of havoc. And there were these riots and police came on campus, and it was a big deal. And it really struck me how cohesive they seemed, how they all seemed to act together as a group. So how could it be that I thought that there weren't groups at all? So the question I asked myself was, how do you distinguish between a group? It seems obvious that they're a group. So the ANC Youth League or EFF Youth League or the EFF who are chanting and holding banners, or Jews on a Friday night who are going to synagogue and doing their thing. How do you distinguish between an apparently very cohesive group and just a collection of individuals? So on any other day on the Wits campus, there's just a bunch of individuals milling around. Some are going to class, some are eating lunch, some are chatting to their friends, but they don't all together form a group. It looks like they're just a bunch of individuals. They're a mere aggregate of individuals. And the question is, what distinguishes between that mere aggregate of individuals and the group that's chanting and singing, or on a Friday night in synagogue, they're going to, they're praying together? What distinguishes between just a mere aggregate of individuals and the group, that groupness? And when I thought about this, I couldn't find a good answer. So I couldn't find an answer as to what distinguishes the one from the other. And so I started to think, well, maybe there are only mere aggregates of individuals. There's just bunches of loosely related people who don't form a cohesive structure or a cohesive social group. So really my idea came out of the idea that there's just sets of individuals or mere aggregates, but there aren't groups that can act together, do things together, have a group identity, and that get a sense of who they are in the world through that group.
I think that makes sense, but can I push a little bit harder on a tougher
hard.
Example?
Yeah,
push hard.
Push hard.
The Amish, the Amish.
Yeah.
There's a grouping of people who. I like the individual argument. I like the individual argument where it comes down and goes, yeah, you might identify as that one thing, but like as soon as we drill down a little bit further, we're going to find a difference between you and the other guy in the group, right?
Exactly.
The Amish kind of, maybe we will, certainly, if you drill down into like, okay, this is a female, this is a male, or this guy, enjoys tilling the field and this guy prefers, milking the cows or whatever it happens to be. I suppose those are small differences within them, but because they're such a rigid community in how they behave, they haven't modernized at all. They very much have kept their traditions. Their daily life is so structured. Is that not a group actually?
Okay, so let's think about this. Okay, so what makes the Amish a group? So in the first part of the discussion, you talked about personal identity. So I identify as a member of the group. And here you're talking more about behaviors. Okay, so there's two different kinds of accounts of what makes groups groups. The one is what's called an objectivist account, and the other one's a subjectivist account. So objectivists think what makes someone a member of the group, what makes a collection of individuals into a group, is that they cooperate in certain ways. They behave in certain ways that have structures that you can see from the outside. So kind of like an anthill. The way that ants kind of cooperate. You can, from a distance, look at the anthill and say, oh, that's a collection of ants. That's a group of ants. Or a beehive, or a wasp. Do they have hives? Or a wasp nest? Yeah. So or a termite hill. Or you can see this kind of group structure in terms of behavior without interrogating any of the individual ants or bees or termites. So you wouldn't ask them about their individual beliefs. You would just see that they behave in a certain way. So objectivists think that, okay, and when you talk about the Amish behaving in certain ways, you're giving an objectivist account of who the Amish are. A subjectivist account would say, well, what makes someone Amish is that they identify as Amish, and they think that a bunch of other individuals also identify as Amish, and they see them as Amish, and those individuals see them as Amish. So there's this sort of group identifying as a common we or us. Okay, so there's these two different kinds of accounts, and both of them suffer from problems. Okay, so the problem with the objectivist account, mere behavior being sufficient for a group, is that there's some very weird counterexamples that we can come up with. Okay, so John Searle, he's a very famous subjectivist, had this objection to objectivism. And this objection amongst philosophers today is generally seen as successful. In other words, it dismisses objectivism as a possible account. So he said, imagine that you're on the library lawns at university and it starts raining. And as soon as it starts raining, everyone jumps up and they pirouette. They dance and pirouette in perfect synchrony, in perfect harmony, until they find cover. And the way they move so gracefully and all together in the same way, it appears like a group, right? They're like a dance group. You know, it's what do they call them? They're
synchronized.
Synchronized. It's a pop-up group, right? They've pre-organized this, and there's a name that they use. What's it called?
Hipster dancers.
Yeah, but
hipsters love pop-ups.
But when people do
flash mobs.
Yes, flash mobs. They're like a flash mob, right? Okay. So he said, imagine that, and it's totally pre-organized. It seems like a group, right? But he said it's also possible that these individuals have never spoken to each other before, have absolutely no organization whatsoever, and it just so happens through pure chance that when it starts raining, they jump up and they start pirouetting and dancing in all the ways that from the outside would look as if they're perfectly coordinated, as if they're a group. And he said the problem with an objectivist account is you can't tell the difference between the two. You can't tell the difference between behavior that seems to be coordinated and genuine coordination. And he said in order to know that there's genuine coordination there, you need some subjectivist element. You need some belief. You need those people to have talked to each other, to discuss it, to believe that they're part of a group, and to do that dancing. And so he said a pure objectivist account, so purely looking at behavior, is not going to capture the differences between these two cases. And so an objectivist account isn't going to work.
So just let me interrupt quickly. So all these examples of groups, we're only talking about human beings. We're not talking about ants.
Oh, it's a really good question.
Or like a herd of antelope or something.
Well, you see, an objectivist would say that ants are a group, but a subjectivist would not. They would say in order for a group of beings to form a group, they need to have what's called collective intentionality. So they need to intend together to do things. So when I pick up this glass of water and take a sip, I'm forming the intention, I am going to pick up this glass of water. But to form a group, you need to have what's called a we intention. So we intend to dance. We intend to protest. We intend to pray together.
Right.
And he said, if you're missing that, then you're missing a group.
All right. No, understood. So
and most animals would miss the we intention.
Yes. Yeah. No, understood. But in terms of, so the subjectivist?
That's
yes,
right.
That's the
Sorry
word.
for all the jargon and terminology. Philosophy can get really bogged down with.
By the time we made a podcast again where people's heads explode. So.
I thought that was last week and the week before. It depends who's listening, I suppose.
Yes.
But okay, what are the objections to the subjectivist? Because that, if I had to think of group, I would think like a sort of collective thinking about solving a problem or wanting to acquire a goal.
Right.
Through,
okay.
People getting together to do something, like work at the same business, for example.
Okay, so let's take the Amish. Okay, so the Amish, just looking at their mere behavior is not going to be good enough because we couldn't distinguish between Amish that are genuinely Amish and a bunch of zombie Amish, right? So imagine you've got like a bunch of people who are zombies and behave just like Amish people. Zombies have no sense of identity, of collective identity. You wouldn't, from the outside, be able to distinguish between them because they're behaving the same way. So the subjectivist will say what makes the Amish is that they have the belief that they're Amish and the belief that other people are Amish and that they believe it of them and they believe it of them. So everyone's believing it of each other and boom, you've got Amish people. Okay. So here's the problem. The problem with the subjectivist account is we can create examples where you've got the beliefs but not the group. You can come up with counterexamples.
Well, isn't that like the sort of postmodern social justice activist thing
Tell me more.
where people are like, well, I identify as a furry, like as an elf. So I identify as an elf, and people are like, well, you don't have a fucking elf.
I don't think that's a furry. I think that's elfkin, actually.
Elfkin. My apologies to all the elfkins.
I met someone who identified as a crow.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
So they identify as a crow.
Right. They believe it.
But we say, well, you don't have a fucking crow. Just grow the fuck up.
Yeah.
So is that...
It is a counterexample, but it's not a good one, unfortunately. Okay. Here's why. Because it doesn't satisfy all the requirements that the subjectivist has. So the subjectivist requires that you believe that you're a crow and you believe other beings are crows and they believe it of you. Presumably other crows wouldn't identify you.
So there has to be those three conditions met.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the crows wouldn't think of you as a crow and that's why you wouldn't be a crow.
Understood.
Yeah. But we can come up with other cases.
So if, those children born in the wild, raised by wolves, in theory.
Oh, that's interesting.
If that were a true story, I don't know if there's ever been an actual.
I think they have. Feral children.
A lot.
Okay, so child somehow ends up in the wilderness,
Raised
ends
by
up
wolves.
being raised by wolves and not eaten by them. Wolves think it's a wolf. It thinks it's a wolf,
But it's not.
but it's not a wolf.
That's a very good example. That's a good counterexample. I'll give you another one that's more kind of traditional, because someone could turn around and say, well, subjectivists could say, well, that's not convincing because, that's wolves. They're not social groups. Can you give me an example of a real social group that involves humans where this is happening? So here's a case. Have you ever seen the movie Dark City?
Yes, quite a while back.
It's one of my favorite movies. Okay, so it's a precursor to The Matrix. It was recorded. It was made a year before The Matrix, and I think The Matrix owes a lot.
I think I have watched it. Alex Parias. What's his name? The guy did
It's
the
when
Crow.
everyone goes to sleep at night, and then
That's right.
they change the sort of entire city. And
That's
there's
right.
People
It's
running.
the same
in the
director as
background.
The Crow.
Is it?
Yes.
I mean, that's
I watched
serendipitous.
I watched years ago, yes. But anyway, yes.
So I mean, Jonathan's right. The plot is that there are these people that live in the city, and it's an eternal night. And at night, when they go to sleep, these super powerful aliens move the city around. And they change the configuration of the city. It's actually very beautifully done in the movie. But they also change the social configurations of the people involved. So you go to sleep next to your wife, and you wake up in the morning, which is still night because it's always in night, but you wake up next to a different woman with different children downstairs. And what's so cool about the movie is it's not just that they move people around so their social situations are different, they implant in them false beliefs and false memories. So you wake up thinking, forgetting your old wife and your old children, thinking that this new person is your wife and that the children downstairs are your children. And this woman, she's been moved around as well, and she wakes up with the false belief that you're her husband and that the children downstairs are her children. And the children wake up with the false memory that they were raised by you and this woman who's sleeping next to you. So you wake up and just everything snaps into existence, and you behave as if you're a family that's always known each other. But actually you haven't known each other at all. You have no real past together. Problem with the subjectivist account is, in this account, you really are a family and you really are married. But that seems weird, right? They false beliefs and false memories. It's not a real marriage or a real family. It's just constructed. And they do it every night, but we can imagine them doing it once an hour, once every minute. You wouldn't think that a new family and a new marriage comes into existence once a minute. The subjectivist account can't distinguish between that sort of case and a real marriage or a real family, because in both cases, the beliefs are there. So we've got a case where the beliefs are present, but the family and the marriage isn't. And so the beliefs aren't sufficient. They don't create the marriage.
Right, but that's a fictional film.
Yes.
So are you arguing perhaps that mentally ill people that have delusions are good examples against the subjectivist account
Well, if they had the same delusions, yes.
together?
Yeah. So if I believed that I was married to you and you believed that you were married to me and we were both going through some kind of delusion, then according to the subjectivist, we would be married.
But is it like a real life example or counterfactual to the subjectivist account?
Yeah. So I can understand why this is a bit unpalatable. So the idea is, what on earth does the dark city have to do with ordinary marriage or ordinary families? And this is where philosophy gets weird, because philosophers want conditions that apply in all cases. And so we come up with what's
Right.
called thought experiments.
Of course.
So they're weird cases where those conditions don't hold. And we say, because they don't hold in these weird cases, then they don't hold in our ordinary cases. And a lot of people think that's very strange. They say, what's similar between this weird dark city case and an ordinary marriage? But philosophers don't look at analogous cases. We're not looking at analogy. We're looking at principles. And we're saying, does the principle of, if you believe you're in the social group and everyone else believes it, is that sufficient to create a social group? We say no, because we can come up with a case where you've got the belief but not the social group.
Even if it doesn't exist in reality?
Correct.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
All that's required is that it's possible. Is it possible for the Dark City case to happen?
But anything, I mean, this like the Dark City thing is mind bending, because there's a lot of examples that have since flowed from this, even quantum physics examples. So the idea that we're in a simulation, for example, is based on this. The idea that you actually think you've lived. So I think I've been on this earth for 30 odd years, and I'm a doctor, and I went to med school for several years, and all of this stuff. The idea behind the Dark City thing is, well, maybe I only woke up this morning.
Yep.
And I think all these things, and all my memories are implanted in me, and none of that stuff ever happened. And in fact, I was born this morning. And I just think I'm like in my mid-30s, and I just think I'm a doctor, or have been for a very long time. And the same with the simulation kind of example is, we all think that there's some sort of control, or we're on a planet called Earth in a universe and in the Milky Way and all that stuff.
But we could be brains in a vat. Or
we could be brains in a vat running a software program. We could be on a marble that we think is the Earth, but is actually just a marble. That's a game for like some superior intelligent alien.
Or so we could just be signals on a motherboard.
Yeah, that as well.
Yeah.
Ants in the anthills. So these are those kinds of ideas that philosophy tends to come up with.
Yeah. So Descartes, very famously, he came up with this line of thinking a long time ago. He said, "Is it possible that my entire experience is controlled by an evil demon?" So back then they didn't have brains in vats. It was hundreds of years ago. They didn't have the technology that theoretically could create these scenarios. But he asked, could it be that my mind is disembodied? I'm not in this body, and it's just controlled by an evil demon that generates these apparent experiences around me. Today we have technology that comes a lot closer to this. Without evil demons, it's a super scientist instead. Recently, pig brains were removed. So pig dies, and then 4 to 6 hours later, they were able to detach the brain. So they what's the word, Jonathan? They decapitated the pig, and they were able to generate movement in the brain. They were able to generate electrons moving around. They were able to generate what looked like, maybe not consciousness, but it looked like activity in the brain. And you can imagine, if you just extend that technology a bit further, if you press the right stimuli in the brain, you could generate any experience in a person. So what's very interesting is that in the Descartes case, we can solve the problem, but not in the marriage case, in the Dark City case. So in the Descartes case, the problem, Descartes said, is that in order for the demon to control everything, he'd have to control not just my beliefs about tables and chairs, but what he called a priori beliefs, my beliefs that aren't based on experience. So he'd have to control the belief that 1 + 1 = 2. But he said, even if the demon were to make me believe that 1 + 1 = 2, it would still equal 2. It's still true, right? I could have true beliefs even if there was an evil demon. So it looks like in the case of the evil demon and a priori beliefs, we can still have those. And Descartes created what's called foundationalism, which said I can build up a whole bunch of beliefs about the world from these a priori beliefs. One of them is, I think, therefore I am. So he said, even if there is an evil demon, I'm thinking right now. And if I were to doubt that I'm thinking, that doubt is a thought. And there must be a thinker, so I exist, right? So we can solve that problem quite well, the matrix problem with the physical world. But it's not so easy when it comes to social groups, because social groups, we think, at least for the subjectivist, are constructed through our beliefs. So I believe I'm married, and so I am married, right? If that were the case, then it's impossible to distinguish between a fake marriage that involves the right kind of beliefs and a real marriage. So, a Dark City case generates real marriages according to the subjectivist. And that seems really weird. There's a difference between if I've only been married to you for 30 seconds because we've woken up in a bed together with false memories of a honeymoon and a marriage ceremony versus having actually lived that honeymoon and ceremony and birthed the kids downstairs and raised them. There's a difference. And our mere beliefs can't capture that. And so subjectivism isn't going to work. And we said earlier that objectivism isn't going to work. And so my conclusion is, what makes you think there are any marriages at all? Any groups at all?
All right. So let's bring this back into sort of real life, and a little bit, we'll come back to philosophy, I'm sure. But we have an entire world established, certainly systems established on the belief that there are groups. Whether they philosophically are or aren't.
And that there's a system.
There's an entire marketing industry, giant, with trillions of dollars worldwide, that says they're groups. You go into any marketing agency and...
But those are sophisticated countries.
Yeah.
Nations, people, histories. I'm part of Western civilization. I'm an Englishman, and I'm tie.
A member of a political party.
Right, a member of a political party. I'm married. All those these are all groups.
And when we sell things, when we try to sell things, we use that marketing, or we use the idea of groups to who we want to sell to. What's your target market? So how does the notion that, okay, there are no groups, even if you're 100% correct and everyone buys into this, how does that play out in the real world in terms of the systems we've established? Ramon refers to nations, and I'm referring to product. How does it pan out?
Well, there's 2 points to make. So the one is that if I'm right, this is the biggest con ever, right? And it's an amazing con. It's the biggest con since the flat earth. Remember, long ago, we believed that the earth was flat. I mean, not that long ago.
What do you mean long ago? People still believe it.
Yeah, some still buy it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and just think about, how prevalent that belief was. You can imagine people selling fall off the end of the world insurance to sailors, right? And if they didn't come back, then their families would collect.
Jonathan, it is a
We are
brilliant business.
missing an opportunity.
The market we haven't exploited.
That's actually where that Malaysian plane went.
Falling off insurance.
Unlike CNN, CNN said it went into a black hole. We're wrong. It actually just went over the edge of the earth.
We could sell insurance to flat earthers. That's brilliant. Thank you, Jason.
I mean, it would be such poetic justice for flat earthers, right? but the point is that everyone believed this very, very widely, and they were wrong.
Sure. But here's the thing. I think as human animals, we sort of want to be part of groups.
Yes. So you can think of the belief in groups as an evolutionary trait.
Yes.
We've evolved to believe in groups, and there's good reason for this. So, when we were in the savannah, or, when we were cavemen, we needed groups to survive. You can't both sleep and look out for your group, to protect you from predators, at night. You need someone to look out and someone to sleep. Hunter-gatherers, you need someone to go out and hunt, and you need someone to stay at home and cook. You need this distribution of activities.
Yeah, division of labor.
Yeah. You can't have that without a group, right?
Absolutely.
So groups have an evolutionary advantage. Believing in groups gives us an evolutionary advantage.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that it seems to me like that part of our brains that needs groups to survive has been planted into a very different kind of setup today, where groups are not 15 or 20 of us, a small community roaming across the savannah. There's tens of thousands in groups, sometimes millions in a group. Think about trans people identifying as part of the trans group. Think about ANC members. How many ANC members are there? Or how many ANC supporters are there? There's millions. Yeah, over 6 million now, I think, or 10 million, or whatever it is. Think about those kind of groups. There's no evolutionary advantage to believing in those. But because our brains are so suited to doing that, we just very easily supplant that initial belief in small communities to very big ones. Now, that gets even bigger on the internet, right? So all these groups form on Facebook. What's interesting is when I've asked people, do you think social groups exist on Facebook? So do you think you're part of a group on Facebook? People are kind of iffy. I'm not sure, but they behave in all the ways as if they do. They collate, they troll other groups that they disagree with, they support their group. They form all the markers of a community on the savannah. So there's this evolutionary advantage, but it seems a bit misplaced in today's world. And also, here's the counterexample. Here's the philosophy: is you can very well imagine something that's got an evolutionary advantage back then having a disadvantage or no advantage today. So the example I use in my PhD is you can imagine this bunch of creatures that live underground. They're like moles, blind moles. And they live underground, and it provides them with an evolutionary advantage because if they come up, their skin is not suited to the sun, and they'll develop cancerous growths and they'll die. So they form this evolutionary belief that up above the ground are these monsters that are going to eat them. Now, there's no monsters above the ground. It's a false belief, but it's got an evolutionary advantage. It helps them, right? So you can imagine a belief that's false, but providing an evolutionary advantage.
Well, like religion, right?
Sure,
I mean, as
sure.
soon as groups get bigger, you cannot actually control behavior, so you create myths around social criteria or behaviors, generally speaking. I mean, once you go past, I think the Dunbar number is a real thing, right? 150 is the Dunbar number.
I don't know about the Dunbar number.
Don't you know?
Tell me about it. Yeah.
So the average person knows 150 people well. So communities of 150, you can have like the most communist attitude in that community, because you can actually form real networks and real what's another word to use? Like you can really work together for the greater good, or the communal good, so to speak.
But once you go above that,
like it's like Facebook friends. You can have 5,000 Facebook friends, but you only know really 150 really, really well, enough to be called a friend in real life.
yeah. So my contention is that evolutionary advantage kind of was really helpful under 150, right? But now it's not really helping us.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Dunbar, and the interesting thing about the Dunbar number is the assumption is you cannot exceed the number. So
It's like a capacity problem.
If the two of you are part of my 150, I bring someone else in. One of you's going to bite the dust, or someone else.
Right.
And I mean, if you think about it, it's probably true. Maybe the 150 can vacillate between
Is it like
individuals.
a psychological claim that a person's mind can't really hold more than 150?
It's part of a psychological claim in that you're unable to keep relationships up with greater than that number of people. I think it's a capacity thing. I think it's got to do with sort of time and ability as well.
It's the ability to have stable relationships with people, and you can really only have it in terms of time, resources, and I think mental energy is 150 people.
Presumably for like the best extroverts, So introverts will be able to do even fewer.
Yeah,
I suspect.
I'm not sure that it's been that well sort of researched, but it is an interesting theory, especially in sort of the age of social media, where the idea is you're so connected to so many people, but actually there's no connection with the overwhelming majority of those people. Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
It's a very interesting idea, and it kind of supports my claim.
So Matt, we're going to do the Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
There's no Jamie.
Did you look it up, Jamie?
But I'm looking it up, Ramon. So basically, it's the suggestive cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships, and thus numbers larger than this 150 generally require more restrictive rules, laws, and enforced norms to maintain a stable, cohesive group.
Okay, so it's not just it is a psychological claim, but in addition, it's a political claim. It's that people will kind of become no longer so cohesive over 150, and so you need laws.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, it's an empirical claim. It's about the way the world works and about the way people work. So I can't say whether it's true or false, but it would support what I'm trying to say. That this evolutionary belief formed in a different kind of state. Okay, there was one question that you asked, Jonathan, that I didn't answer, which is kind of how does my belief play out? So in a way that's different from the way things are now. So if I'm right that there aren't groups, it changes what you would do politically, right? So the first thing is, well, there aren't political parties, on my view. So as much as I respect Ramon and I really like the idea of the ZACP, I didn't vote in this election, and I never have, because it's so strange to me to vote.
See, it's people like you that just bring us down.
I mean, if I had just voted, this whole election would have gone differently, is what you said.
Don't worry. Somewhere right now, Musi is banging his fist at you, Jason. Banging his fists.
I mean, we can have a whole discussion about, every year I go on a drive to try and convince people not to vote. This year I didn't, out of respect for Ramon, but normally, every 5 years I do this.
I did it with you before. Come on, Jason.
Yeah. So on my view, it would be very odd to vote. Because A, you're voting for a political party that doesn't exist. B, you're voting as a citizen of a state that doesn't, of a country that doesn't exist. Citizens don't exist. All of these are roles within groups, and so it's very odd to me. So on my view, anarchism has to be the solution. But my view isn't just that we should have an anarchist state; it's that we're in an anarchist state right now. That there is no governing party right now. It doesn't exist.
When you say doesn't exist, someone's going to say, okay, but come on. I went to the polling station. I put my X next to the DA or the ANC or
On
the
a
EFF
physical
or whatever,
piece of paper.
on a physical piece of paper.
Yeah.
And then I saw them celebrating the votes that they got. And then I even saw them arriving to parliament in these fancy,
And I got
disgusting
a
dresses.
phone call from Musi Mamani.
I got those too. Yeah.
And I can go to their offices and they actually have offices, and some of them have like fancy cars with logos on the side of them. And like it all exists, right? There is like physical, I can touch it. And I can go meet that politician I voted for or his party, I can shake, or her party, I can shake her hand.
Yeah.
So what do you mean it doesn't exist?
Okay, so what's interesting here is that there's definitely. I'm not one of those crazy philosophers that thinks that physical stuff doesn't exist. I do think,
And
that
there are those.
Yeah, they exist. But I mean, those philosophers exist.
Do they
Well,
exist? I would argue. I'm putting forward now. Those philosophers don't exist.
And what do you mean by physical things, though?
Yeah. Oh, we can have these discussions if you like, but let's just assume I'm
Basically-
normal in that way.
You basically put yourself into a group of philosophers who believe things exist. Physical things exist, rather.
A mere collection, a mere aggregate of philosophers.
All right, sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that ballot paper exists, but I deny that it's really a ballot paper. What I'm saying it's a piece of paper with some text on it and some colored markings, and someone puts an X or a whatever next. How do you vote? You put an X? You tick?
Yeah, well, about 180,000 people also don't know because they spoiled their ballots by assumptively,
Right.
I don't know, drawing a penis on the ballot. So there you go. You can do whatever you like.
I think it's over 200,000, but yeah, okay. So on my view, there are all these individual pieces of paper, right? And there are all these it's text on them and people drawing penises and crosses and ticks on them. But what there isn't a party that text refers to. So the one that says ANC with a certain logo on it doesn't refer to an existing party in the world called the ANC. There's just that piece of text. There's just that paper. Another example is you say you go to Parliament. Well, on my view, Parliament doesn't exist. All that exists is the building. So there is a physical building there that people walk into and deliberate and
Okay, hold on. Let me take it apart so I understand it correctly. So you have a ballot paper. It there's some colored stuff on it. You put an X. You think that refers to ANC. It doesn't really refer to the ANC.
Correct.
Then someone takes the ballot. They interpret it to mean the ANC, right?
And more than that, they interpret it to mean that you vote for the legitimacy of the ANC.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then they give that party a certain number of seats in a building.
This non-existent
but
party, yes.
they've only because they've interpreted that building to be called the parliament.
Yes,
And they've interpreted those seats to belong to people who won X's on the ballot.
that's right. And they interpret certain individuals inside that building to represent the ANC.
So if I can give a more maybe understandable example to someone who's listening and going, what the hell is Jason on about?
Don't worry, that's a common reaction. Yeah.
it's if everyone tomorrow on this planet dies, right? So now we've had this election and everyone dies, and in 30 days later, aliens rock up and they know nothing about Earth at all. And they get off their spaceship at that IEC center and they're like, okay, horrible food, terrible computing, no air conditioner, but what's going on here? Mm-hmm. Right? They would not be able to interpret the same answer that we currently interpret.
Exactly.
And they wouldn't know that they should put a certain number of ANC people into a building that happens to be called Parliament.
Exactly. That's a great case. So the case I used in my PhD to open it was the case of an individual alien. So he's never related to other aliens. He just exists eternally by himself. And he comes to Earth with all of us alive. And he watches us do things.
Mark Zuckerberg, basically.
And he said, isn't it so ironic that he's created like the biggest social network? But anyway, so this alien comes down and he watches you walk into a store, I mean, it's not a store to him. It's just a room. And he watches you walk in and take food off the shelves and walk up to a person at the front and give them a piece of plastic. And the person taps it. And then you walk out with all this food. And he says, what's going on? I don't understand. How come you just get to walk away with his food. And then he watches you walk down the street and put up your hand, and this car stops and you get inside, and then the car drives you around, you get out and you give it this piece of plastic again. And you explain to it, no, I was paying for those things with the card. The card gives, it moves money from me to them. And you say, and the alien says, but what's money? And you say, well, money is this thing that the Reserve Bank controls, and there's an economy. And you say, but what's the Reserve Bank and what's an economy? And what happens is, as you answer these questions, you have to keep referring to other social phenomena to answer what any given social phenomenon is.
So but here's where my concern comes in with this type of philosophy. What you just said is that everything is a social construct.
Well, I'm saying not everything, not this cup.
Okay.
Not
the
the
things
building.
exist.
Yeah, physical stuff
It's
exists.
behaviors.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the question. Is social phenomena, is it all just reducible to behaviors? That's weird to think that like the Reserve Bank is reducible to behaviors, or that the ANC is reducible to behaviors.
Not just behaviors, it's thoughts too. You have to believe that's the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, but like if
well.
I were to ask you what the Reserve Bank is, and if you were to ask me what the Reserve Bank is, we're going to give very different answers, you know.
Well, I think it has a definition in the dictionary.
Yes, but that definition is going to rely on the definition of other social phenomena, like an economic system and like the transfer of value. And if we interrogate those terms, they're going to rely, in their definitions, are going to rely on other social terms. And so it seems like there's a big circularity problem. We can't ever define what social phenomena are without referring to other social phenomena. We can't ground them in the individualistic physical world. So really what you all, on my view, what you're talking about is just unicorns, right? So when you're talking about, I prefer the ANC to the ZACP or the ZACP to the ANC, what you're talking about is I prefer unicorns with blonde hair over unicorns with red hair. And it's as nonsensical as that to me. I don't understand what people are talking about when they prefer one political party over another.
Maybe you have Asperger's or something.
It's possible. It's possible that some part of my brain didn't form. But it could be that the part of my brain that didn't form allows me to see the world as it is.
All right, but you see value. Sorry, Ramon. You see value in some of the sort of behavior that we've established, which is just a construct, right? So, for example, the credit card, being able to go into a shop, pay, and walk out with your stuff, there's value in that. And there's a big sort of move to find anything we don't like, or certain groupings, so to speak. But people that don't like certain things, they go, well, that's a social construct, and therefore it can be gotten rid of, essentially, because it's a construct, and any construct can be reconstructed or changed.
Right.
And so that becomes a bit of a dangerous area of thought. It's not that it's a dangerous area of thought. It's just, it's dangerous to the solid structures of some of the things we actually like. So, you know, the whole battle of ideas, the whole culture war that's going on is really that. People are trying to reformat the societies within which they live, the cultures within which they live, because they find them to be, inverted commas, problematic. And that, some people would argue, and you know, we regularly argue, places what the value we found in those specific civilizations or societies, it places them at great risk.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, what's happening there is there's an hypocrisy involved. So it's kind of like saying, if you're a feminist, I hate the patriarchy. It's a social institution and a social construction which I can break down through protest and through talking about it in this way, and we can eliminate it altogether. But what they're forgetting is they're identifying as feminists, right? Which is another social construct. You know, what's a feminist? You know, how's that any different from what's a patriarch? You know, it's a bunch of beliefs and behaviors which can't very easily be specified and is a construct. So if you want to use social constructionism to eliminate certain social constructs, you kind of got to go all the way. You've got to be consistent and eliminate all of them, which I'd be very happy with, right? Because my view is that you should, you know, none of them exist anyway. By the way, Searle, who I mentioned earlier, he had this objection, the pirouetting objection on the library lawns, people jumping up in the rain and pirouetting to find shelter. He's created or constructed, weirdly, the best subjectivist account. And on his view, a social construct is as real as rocks and trees. So if I construct a group together with you, we construct a group together, that is as real as this table or this glass of water that's sitting in front of me.
For the people in that social construct, or
everyone.
physically.
It pops
Objectively,
into
rather.
existence.
Really?
Yeah, it is as real as anything else. It has objective reality. But it depends on people's beliefs. The way it comes into existence is through people's beliefs. But once those beliefs are in place, it is as real as rocks and trees.
And you disagree, obviously.
Yes. So my big problem is the Dark City case, where you've got the beliefs, but you don't create the structure, the marriage.
But I mean, I understand your view very well. We've spoken about this endlessly over the years. And I just don't know how, because people think you're mad, firstly. If you say, well, groups don't exist.
Yeah.
Either they call you a racist for not believing groups exist, or,
Yeah.
Anyway. And how are you ever, this is not a persuasive argument to people, because people are tribal. I think, well, evolutionary, dictates that we are tribal. We seek people who are similar to us. So we vote we vote in people that look like us or think, or we perceive them to think like us. We live with people who are like us, so to speak, and then not those people, but our people.
It's not convincing.
Not at all. So then,
Yeah. But
then,
is it not convincing because of people's biases? Or is it not convincing because it's not philosophically plausible?
it's a good argument, and I was convinced of it. But
and then you went and joined a political party.
it doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist. None of it matters. I just did a lot of work for something that doesn't exist.
There's a point that you're not making, but maybe implying or suggesting, and that's this idea around pragmatism. Okay, so
The dirty P word.
Yeah,
Libertarians hate that word.
what's his name? There's this very popular Canadian psychologist slash anti-social justice warrior, Jordan Peterson, who's been on your show
Twice.
twice. Okay, so I listened to one of those arguments. So Jordan Peterson, if I understand him correctly, is quite a famous pragmatist, right? So
Yeah, I think he would agree with that.
yeah, so pragmatism. William James was the first proponent of kind of a coherent pragmatism, and the view was that, well, if something is really useful, if a set of beliefs is really useful, then it's true, and conversely, if a set of beliefs is not useful, then it's as good as false. So he equated truth with how practical it is. Now, it could be, I mean, that pragmatism is just wrong. There are beliefs that are true and just totally impractical. You know, like theoretical mathematics can be bizarre, but it's true and can have no application whatsoever. Or we might not know what it is yet. So I kind of see this view of mine as having very few practical implications and very difficult to it would have practical implications if everyone believed it,
right?
But very few practical implications if they don't.
Because I mean, when we debate with people and they use terms like the DA, or they use terms like Zulus or
Imagine
whatever.
you were to stop them there and say, "But what do you mean by the DA?"
Exactly, but you have to deconstruct the entire way they see the world.
Yes, which takes a while. I've done it once or twice with people.
And
they
then
get very
went
angry.
insane and jumped off a building or something.
Well, no, they get angry. They get very angry because that's the alternative. The alternative to getting angry and thinking I'm mad is that they're mad, and no one likes to think that. So, you know, if you were to really think about your day, that you go to work for a company that doesn't exist, it's a group, and you go home to a wife that isn't your wife, and a family that isn't your family, and see friends that aren't your friends, because friendships are groups. If you really were to think about this carefully, it would drive you nuts, right?
So how does it not drive you nuts?
Well, it maybe has. Maybe I've had time to think about it. I've had years and years and years to think about it. And nowadays, I've been engaged twice. I've never been married, but I've been engaged twice. Engagements don't exist on my view, but there is a person who I've made a promise to, and they've made a promise to me, and we have feelings towards each other. On my view, relationships don't exist, but there is a person who has feelings about me and that I have about them. And so I can kind of shorthand it in my mind. But sometimes these things have practical implications and problems. So, in the traditional view of a relationship, you've got two individuals, individual A and individual B, and then you've got a third thing, which is the relationship between them. And in a lot of religions, they talk about it. So when you get married, a priest or a rabbi will say, sometimes the two of you have to do things that aren't in your own self-interest for the marriage, as if this marriage is a third thing that exists between them. Now, imagine you don't think of it that way. You just think of the two individuals involved. You might behave differently. I've got a friend who got married to another friend, and he sometimes says, well, he would have done things differently if they hadn't been married. That is strange to me. Both of them might have done things differently. They might not be together if they hadn't gotten married. So, on my view, there isn't a marriage. There's just the individuals involved. So it would change the way I behave in a relationship. I wouldn't do things for the marriage.
Right, but you do use things that you think don't exist, like money, right? You need money every day to survive. So that's why you work. You're an author. You write books.
Yeah, and I spend more than 50% of my time marketing those books.
Right.
Trying to make money from them. So I can go and buy things with this card, this like piece of plastic at a grocery store, which is so bizarre to me.
But you have to.
I have to do it. Yeah.
Social construction, it is. You can deconstruct it as much as you want to, but you have to use it.
I'm one of these moles, one of these blind moles living under the soil, I don't believe that there's monsters outside, but I can't go up above the soil. I just know the reason why, because the sun is a problem, but I have to behave just like everyone else. I have to stay under the soil. So I have to live my life just like everyone else does, but kind of knowing that it's all a pretense, that I have to pretend. I have to pay taxes that I don't think are real.
So you're Neo in the Matrix before he gets out of the Matrix.
Exactly.
All right. Fine. But if more people had this belief, do you think most people can cope with this type of belief system? So it's quite nihilistic in some respects. It certainly breaks down a lot of the things where people would find value. So people find value in religion. You would argue there's no religion because, well, that's probably the most the original grouping of humans. There's no that find value in family. There is no such thing as a family in your book. So how does this square with what's maybe, because like Jordan Peterson will argue that you need those things, that they are like, and it's not even that you want them, it's that you need them. Yeah. It's that your very existence is based on those things. And the minute you lose those things, not necessarily in a very defined form, but the minute you lose those things, you become completely depressed, essentially, and you don't want to be on the earth anymore.
And he may be right. So he may be right that in order to live a meaningful, happy life, you have to buy into the Matrix. You have to believe it. You have to be one of those blind moles who believes there's monsters upstairs, up above the soil. You might have to believe it in order to be happy, but it still could be false that these things exist, that families and religions exist. Schopenhauer is a very good, he gives a good case for this. So Schopenhauer believed that there is no meaning. So life is not meaningful. But he said, if you were to tell the average person this, and if you were to convince them, it's kind of like a tree losing all its leaves at once. Yeah. It can't photosynthesize, right, and it could die, right? But it still could be the case that there's no meaning.
I mean, he's probably correct. The reality is that no human that is alive right now will be remembered in 500 years. And if the few that are remembered in 500 years won't be remembered 500 or 1,000 years after that, that the only people who've reached sort of Deus level are kind of Jesus. And now we're not even sure who he was. So it's not really helpful to him.
There's an argument to say we don't
debating
remember
whether
Jesus.
He was a black dude or a brown dude or a white dude or whether he was a Jew or not. Like there's all these kind of arguments. So it's not really helpful because no one remembers him for exactly who he was, right?
And if you identify meaning with longevity, then there isn't.
That's a thing. If meaning is to be remembered, then that's going to be a huge problem for you.
Yeah. So if meaning equals group identity, then it's, believing that there aren't groups is submitting yourself to a life without meaning. And that's hard. But two things. So two possible responses. So the one is, maybe I don't have to think that life is devoid of meaning without groups. Maybe it's possible to develop meaning through other ways of interacting. So yes, you interact with other humans, but maybe you don't think that you're forming a group, but you still find that interaction meaningful. So that's the one possible solution. The other one is to bite the bullet and say, okay, there's no meaning, but there are other values. So, for example, there's happiness, there's pleasure, there's knowledge, learning new things, there's joy, there's perfection, trying to become better at everything you do. So there's morality, doing good things for other people. So there's all these other meanings that you could construct in your life, or not meanings, that's the wrong word. There's all these other values that you could have in your life, even if you don't have meaning. And those values might make your life worthwhile.
I wonder what you think. I mean, it's very controversial, but what you think about intellect and the ability to not rely on this meaning. Sam Harris recently made the comment that, he doesn't have God in his life, and he doesn't place any value in religion, and he's perfectly a happy person. And I believe him. I believe that Sam Harris is a happy guy. But I don't think a lot of people could feel happiness without that religious structure. And they're not necessarily, I'm not calling them stupid at all. There are very smart people who are very religious people as well. I'm just wondering where the line is on that for people. Is it so it's intellect's not the right measure, but it's weird. It's kind of like, I think Sam Harris is a very intelligent guy.
Well, isn't it about self-actualization?
Maybe. I mean, perhaps that's what it is.
Personally, I'm not a religious person. I understand people who are, and I'll leave them alone to practice what they wish to do. And if they find meaning in that, I'm perfectly happy for them. But I used to be like the new atheist dickhead. It's like, oh, you're just stupid for believing in it. Now I've grown up a little bit, which is more than most. But, I'm happy doing like things generally, even for things that don't exist, like a political party. Does a podcast exist?
It's not a group.
It's a file. It's
an
audio
a social
file.
phenomenon. I don't know. It's a good question.
But this brings me a lot of joy, right?
Right.
To do this, or to work as well. So the question is, I mean, you find, I don't know, joy in writing books, perhaps?
Yes, I write science fiction novels.
Yeah, so every time there's a sale on Amazon, do you get like a bit of a fizz in your stomach?
Well, maybe like every time there's 10. Yeah,
this imaginary money that doesn't exist, but that's the reward mechanism.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I'm human too. So I also like social affirmation, and I also like money, and I suffer from all the elements of every other human. But
you can kind of see behind the stage play
intellectually.
So you can see the workings. So everyone else is just kind of going along with it, but you can see all the underneath workings.
It sounds really arrogant, but
I hear you. You're using the money, but at the same time, you're standing back and going, yeah, I'm using this stuff, but this stuff doesn't actually exist. It's a complete...
Yes.
It doesn't exist at all. I think that meaning conversation is interesting, perhaps a much longer conversation, and we should have Peterson back on the podcast for it.
Just one thing to say to you is that you said it could be that someone who believes this can't be happy, or many people, if they were to believe this can't be happy.
I think many people wouldn't be.
Yeah.
But there's a wonderful philosopher who lives in Joburg. His name is Thaddeus Metz, and he's the world expert on the meaning of life. He's fantastic. And he has a line which he's used many times, which I really enjoy, which is happiness is overrated. He thinks that there are other values that give our lives much more than happiness does. He thinks meaning is one of those, but there are others as well. The one that I think is the most important is perfection. So trying to become as perfect as possible, which includes doing things that are moral, includes doing things like learn how to play tennis well, become intellectually, read lots of books and study. It includes lots of different values. I think if you become as perfect as possible, you can never be perfect in a godly sense, but you can perfect yourself as much as possible. I think you'll live a very valuable life.
But how do we know if perfection exists?
Or
morality, or these values, are they also sort of social constructs?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, no.
And there's very good arguments for why they're not.
Oh, okay. I'm happy to hear some of them.
Here's one for morality. Right. Okay, so some people, especially social justice warriors, think that morality is socially constructed. So the idea is that an action is wrong just because we collectively agree or believe that it's wrong. So the idea is that it's wrong to murder because, we have this kind of social contract that we've said, it's wrong to murder. And there is excellent philosophy to show that that is false, that morality is objective and not culturally relative. There's a number of excellent objections to cultural relativism, which could be a whole show on its own, but I'll give you just one, is that on cultural relativism, it is impossible to criticize a culture. So it is impossible to say that beating your wives just because they're women is wrong. Why? Because in that culture, there's collective agreement that it's the right thing to do. So it would be impossible with any legitimacy to say, don't do this. Or it is wrong to commit an ethnic genocide within your country, because if everyone believes that you should, then you just should, right? But that seems crazy. It's immoral to commit ethnic cleansing, and so cultural relativism must be false. So there's lots of these objections, but I am convinced that morality objectively exists. There are objective laws
a priori.
That's I'd say a priori, yeah.
Because this sort of fact versus this sort of where there is fact argument that happened between Sam and Jordan. I don't know if you heard that at all.
I didn't.
It was about truth, though.
Sorry, truth.
Yeah. Sam was about objective truth, and then Jordan actually made a utilitarian argument that truth is what is most beneficial.
Right. So he's a pragmatist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes, we agreed on that.
And Sam makes the argument that, there's nothing on earth that murder would still be wrong.
Yes. So I agree with that. So I believe that murder being wrong, that moral fact, is baked into the nature of the universe. And it was there long before humans existed. We discover it. We don't create it.
But who put it there?
Well, I think it is there, the same way the Big Bang was there. No one put it there.
Now you make an interesting argument for God. Excuse my voice.
Well, I don't think God put the Big Bang there. I think the Big Bang was there.
An accident. Or it's a reaction to something. Was it completely random?
It just is. It had no cause. It just is.
Like God.
Well, this is the problem. If you think that God was required to explain why the Big Bang happened, then you'd have to say, well, there must be a reason why God is the way God is. There must be a cause for God. And the way religious people get away from that problem is they say God, by definition, is the first cause. Yes. But then why not just define the Big Bang as the first cause? You don't need an extra step.
Yeah. But away from God, I really want to understand this. No, because I think we all share the belief that, okay, I won't speak for Jonathan, but I don't think there is such thing as a God. They are just religious practices that are evolutionary, relevant or useful at a particular time. But in terms of morality being universal, in what way?
What do you mean by universal?
Well, didn't you say that's
objective?
Objective. So is there a big difference in the terms?
Well, it just depends what you'd mean by universal. So you might mean by universal that everyone believes it.
Which is untrue.
Yes. Different societies have different moral codes. But that's different from saying morality is different in different societies. In other words, the moral laws baked into the universe are different in different societies. And in my view, the same moral laws exist regardless. So I'm being very abstract here, but let me come down to kind of like a simple principle. So I'm a utilitarian.
Right.
I think what makes an action right is that it benefits society as a whole. It has the highest utility, or it makes people the happiest. That is true regardless of whether you're sitting in Afghanistan or in America or in South Africa. It's just that some societies behave better according to utilitarianism than others. some societies have rituals or have social norms that benefit society as a whole, and some do so less.
Right. I mean, and that's the big argument for capitalism or for the free market.
That
or
it has
for,
the best utility.
Or for human rights. It leads to less suffering perhaps, or at least to greater wealth.
The reverse, of course, unfortunately, is that utilitarianism can be manipulated. So you can make a socialism argument using utilitarianism,
Sure.
and that's always the argument that does get made, right?
Sure.
This is in South Africa. The EFF would put forward this, or any good communist would put forward this argument. There's highest inequality. If we just spread the wealth around, that would be the best for everyone in the country. And then, if you don't go to the next step and find what is the inevitable outcome, which is that once you redistribute, you can't cut that pie into big enough slices for everyone to get more than a crumb.
Yeah.
That's the danger of utilitarianism that approach.
You may be right that it's used that way. I don't think that's the best way of supporting socialism. And I think, as you say, it creates a smaller pie. A socialist system or a Marxist system creates a smaller pie. So on utilitarian principles, it's just false, right? But I think people usually support socialism in a different way, not using utilitarianism. They support socialism using rights. So everyone has an equal right to certain stuff, and so you should give them that stuff. I don't think rights exist, because rights are not a utilitarian idea at all. Those are really strange creatures that I can't wrap my head around. What is a right? Have you ever met one, smelt one, tasted one, shaken its hand?
Felt one.
But the problem aren't you a bit hypocritical in the sense that you believe in objective moral value? So you believe that murder is wrong, but you don't believe in a right to defend yourself. For example. And here's the thing is I would agree with you that a lot of rights don't exist, because I think they're bullshit, specifically positive rights. But I think the negative rights, I think the American Constitution got this correct.
So the obligation not to do something.
Not only that you have inalienable rights.
So the obligation for something not to happen to you.
So exactly. So you have the inalienable right to free speech, for example. You have the inalienable right to self-defense, should you be, harmed or attacked. You have the right to dignity in the sense of to be not persecuted for your very existence of who you are. And I don't mean that in the sense of having a nasty word spoken in your general direction.
Yeah,
I mean,
you mean like dragged behind a truck.
I mean actually physically persecuted.
Denied a job.
So I think those sort of negative rights are the same as, and I would agree with you that do not murder or not to murder is a natural existence. I think that's correct. I think do not steal is also a natural
definitions
existence.
of words matter here.
Yeah. So I need to clarify.
Natural.
Yeah. So I need to clarify something. I did earlier say that it's wrong to murder. Okay. And strictly speaking, a utilitarian cannot say that. Okay. So utilitarian can only say that it is wrong to murder if it results in negative utility.
Yeah, because sometimes it might be right to murder.
Yeah, it might result in positive utility. Right. So for example, murdering Hitler might have resulted in a net benefit, and so it is the right thing to do. So utilitarian will never say that specific types of actions are always right or always wrong, whereas a rights-based system will. So rights-based systems come from Kantian philosophy, and Kant said that murder is always wrong, lying is always wrong. And this produced our rights-based society and our laws. So our laws are all about inalienable rights, except under these conditions where they conflict with another right. So, for example, free speech. You always have free speech unless it's hate speech. You know. But the problem with this kind of system is that you've got this huge edifice of rights and negative and positive rights, but then they conflict, and then you need more. You need a superstructure on top of that to work out what to do when they conflict, and then those conflict, and it becomes arbitrary about which rules you put in your superstructure. So my view is that the law is just nonsense. All you should have is a utility calculator. And I wrote a novel about this, by the way.
The utility goal.
Yeah, it's called Head On. So everyone gets a device installed in their brains, and it measures how much happiness or unhappiness they are caused by other people or cause other people, and that determines how good they are, and they spend money with their head-ons or their pleasure units. Anyway, this is a shameless plug of my own novel.
It sounds like the Chinese social credit score in a way.
Yeah, well,
you are responsible for the social credit score in China.
So
they read your book.
It's close. So in my story, it was written about 8 years ago. It was when
before the Black Mirror episode.
Yeah. So it was.
I hope you asked for royalties.
Yeah. So it was written based on Bhutanese society. So Bhutan, they don't have this idea of GDP. They have this idea of GNH. So instead of gross domestic product, it's gross national happiness.
Right.
So the idea was, what would happen if Bhutan took over the world? This is the system, this kind of super technological system I think they would operate on.
So for example, in a utilitarian system or under, the like free speech, would you say calling someone a cunt is wrong in some circumstances because it leads to negative consequences?
Negative utility, yeah.
Like in terms of what, people getting offended by it, or
yeah.
Okay, so how do you define those parameters?
Okay, so I'm a big free speech proponent. The reason being that I think the amount of harm that people's offensive speech causes is minimal, compared with the amount of harm that will be caused if you had a law that banned that speech. So a law that bans offensive speech would be much more harmful in the long run. It would prevent progress within society. People wouldn't be allowed to express ideas. You wouldn't be able to identify truly bigoted people. There's various reasons why laws like that would have negative utility in the long run. I think that negative utility or negative happiness or that suffering that's caused is less than the suffering that's caused to someone when you use the word cunt or use words that if I were to say on here, I might be arrested for saying.
What about using the justification? You can use your utilitarian approach to justify war, for example. And you might be pro some wars.
If it has long-term positive utility.
And this is the problem with utilitarianism as well, is in the short term, it's very hard to tell often, especially for big actions, whether they ultimately result in net positive or net negatives.
Right.
The Iraq War, for example, it's very popular to say you were either against the Iraq War or you were for it, but now you're against it. I was for it and I'm still for it, which is an unpopular position. And the reason is I believe that in 50 years' time, when we look back and we go, would we have rather had Saddam Hussein executing on average 5,000, I think it was 5,000 people a day for his entire lifetime, and then his sons taking over and doing exactly the same thing? Or would we like Iraq to be like it is now? And I think in 50 years' time we will find it will resemble sort of Kuwait and a little bit of Saudi, but maybe not as much in the religious sense. The point is it'll be a functioning country where people don't die as much. And yes, there have been a lot of war deaths and we can do the calculations, but all I'm saying is that these are difficult things to decide because they can play out over decades or centuries even.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's two things I want to say. So the one is that you're absolutely right that this is a problem with utilitarianism, is how far in advance do you look? How far into the future do you look to see whether the consequences of your actions are positive or negative? This is absolutely true. So there's different ways utilitarians deal with this problem. The one way is by putting a cap on it and saying, okay, we're only going to look up until a certain point, which seems like arbitrary, like where do you cap it? I have a nice solution to that, which is I'm a probabilistic utilitarian, not an actual utilitarian. So an actual utilitarian looks at the actual consequences that follow an action. So if I wage war, and at the time it seems like it's the right thing to do because all the evidence suggests I should do so, but then later it turns out that the evidence was wrong, there really wasn't oil there, then the actual utilitarian would say you did the wrong thing. But the probabilistic utilitarian would say you did the right thing. Because based on the evidence you had at the time, the probabilities were that this was the right thing to do. Now, probabilistic utilitarians, you only have strong probabilities going so far into the future.
Yeah.
You don't have them indefinitely. So probabilistic utilitarian...
The climate change problem.
Yeah. So a probabilistic utilitarian says, is it probable that climate change is going to be a problem? If it is probable, then prevent it. If it's not, then don't worry about it. So that's the one thing I want to say. The second thing is that this problem of waging wars and, as you say, big actions, so actions that involve lots of agents, that involve whole countries, this is not a problem that I suffer from as someone who doesn't believe countries exist. So I think the only morality that's involved in the world is individualistic. I think the only kind of morality that matters, that exists, is what am I going to do today? What is this individual going to do? That's all that matters. So the question isn't whether United States declares war. The question is whether I get onto a ship, take a gun, and go and shoot people. That's the question. And that's an answer that utilitarianism can answer for you, because it's just my actions and the consequences of my actions that I have to consider, not this grand country, which I don't think exists, declaring war with another country that doesn't exist. So I think morality is a lot simpler if you're an individualist like myself.
So your arguments, I mean, as I said, I've known you for a long time. We've spoken about this.
You're
definitely. I'm a convert. You are my God, Jason Werbeloff.
I have a following of one.
11 more to go.
We can make you a prophet. I think your arguments would be very, very popular with libertarians.
Yeah, well, libertarians are individualists.
But are they, though?
No, for some reason.
Why? What are the common objections?
Well, they are very anti the state. They spend an enormous amount of time saying how the state is bad.
They need it to exist.
Yeah, the state, on my view, doesn't exist. So you can't object to it.
So power structures don't exist.
No,
at all.
Not on my view.
Nothing.
Power doesn't exist on my view.
Who's taking your tax, Jason?
My non-existent money.
And what happens when you don't pay the non-existent government official your non-existent money?
That's a good question.
You go to a real prison.
Well, some guy, some barbarian arrives at my apartment and puts me in chains and takes me off to a cell. Yeah, I mean that is incredibly unjust. That's why I'm an anarchist. But yeah, so I do pay taxes. But do I think it's the right thing to do? Well, it results in the best outcome for me. But if you could convince me that there was no risk of someone harming me if I didn't pay my taxes.
Or if you could mitigate the risk somehow.
Yes, then I absolutely would not pay taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have not been convinced of that. I mean, I do think there's too big a risk.
Because all these social constructions.
Yeah, because so many people believe in them.
Yes, and they will behave in that way.
Yes.
And then they will cause suffering to you.
So I have to be the rat underground that behaves just like every other rat. Every other mole, I have to stand around.
So everyone else is that guy who stays in the matrix because it tastes the steak.
Yeah.
He knows it's not a real steak. No, maybe you're that guy, actually.
Maybe.
You're in the matrix, the steak is fake.
But it
Well,
tastes
everyone listening to this podcast now knows the steak is fake, but it just tastes so good.
It just tastes so good.
Yeah,
it's like a vote for the ZACP. I know it's not real, but I just felt something when I put my
Okay, I do think there are good reasons not to vote, even if groups do exist. But anyway.
Yeah, I know all of them. Most of them.
I'm sure you do.
Your one vote doesn't actually matter.
That's the
out of
one,
25 million votes, your vote doesn't actually matter.
That's right.
What's the second one?
Second one is like you could be doing better things with your time. You could be having sex or convincing lots of other people to vote your way.
I thought you were going to say convincing other people to have sex.
Yeah, you could do that too.
While voting.
But the point is you could do things with that time that has a greater effect. Another one is that by voting, you are making a good faith claim that whoever wins the election is legitimate. And you don't want to do that because they aren't.
Yeah.
So
I still believe all of those things.
And did you vote, Ramon?
I did, actually. But it was for myself.
Literally.
Yeah.
Think of it as a social justification for the existence of my non-existent political party.
Okay, but now hold on. Do you agree with my argument that if you vote, you're holding that whoever wins the election, even if it's not your party, is legitimate?
And for others,
you're making that good faith claim.
For others, not for me.
Yeah, but that's where it gets uncomfortable, right? Yeah.
This is the first time I partook in the system. Yes, I get it.
The first time you voted.
I don't think you're legitimizing, so I would just make a clarification. So I am a voter, have been since I turned 18, and I would say that it's not that I legitimize. So I don't legitimize the ANC government, but I do legitimize the system which brings the ANC government into power.
Okay.
That would be the
Democracy?
sort of line is. Yeah, so I'm legitimizing democracy.
But democracy produces the ANC.
Yeah,
as
agreed.
ruling party.
And to an extent, I accept your argument wholly, because when the ANC does stupid things and when they tank the economy and when, I earn less now relative to global markets than I did 10 years ago.
None of those things exist. So why are you worrying?
So,
assuming they do.
So the thing is all of those things, I think are true. Like, I do legitimize them. I am angry that they do those things. But it's kind of like hamster on a wheel, right? It's like, well, I'm here, I'm on the wheel. I can choose to just sit in the wheel, or I can run on the wheel, but I'm in the wheel one way or another. And so it's not, as I say, not that I'm legitimizing their actions or that particular party, but I am legitimizing the system within which they rise to power and then oppress me.
I wonder if you can make that distinction, because if you think democracy is a legitimate process and democracy puts the ANC into government,
Yeah.
and
So I have an interesting view on democracy.
what's your view?
So I think democracy only works 90% of the time. And then I think 10% of the time it needs to be authoritarian. I think the entire world knows this. And I think most of our systems function like this. And we fool ourselves into believing we have true democracy in liberalized countries. So let me use the corporate world as a better example. Your company is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. But good companies are 90% a democracy and about 10% a dictatorship.
Yeah, but they're democratic about like the choice of coffee.
No, but they're democratic up to the
working
point of the
hours.
board. So the CEO will sit with a whole bunch of board members. I sit on a couple of excos, and I'll give you an example. So when I'm in charge of the exco, the way I run things is I tell everyone, we will discuss everything. We will debate everything. But at the end of the day, because I'm going to take it on the chin for the failures and the successes, I make the final call. So ultimately, there cannot be full democracy. I don't let people have votes on whether we're going to go with option A or option B. We debate option A and B. I see where everyone stands, and then I make a call. Now, I might be influenced by where people stand. That may be it. And this plays out in boardrooms across the world, and it also plays out in governments. At the end
Parliament.
at parliaments, everyone loves to think of Donald Trump as a dictator. So fine, here's your opportunity to think of him exactly like that.
So are you endorsing that system?
So I'm saying that I think that's a system we have. I think many people are fooled into believing there's full democracy. I don't believe you can have full democracy. And when you have full democracy, you have chaos. We see it, some SRCs at universities, for example, try this full democracy nonsense. And then you have the wisdom of crowds, you see. Mm-hmm. And it turns out the crowds are not very wise.
It depends. If they are diffused and and people are relatively free, they do provide solutions to many, many problems.
Yeah.
It's not about,
That's a crowdsourcing issue, right? In terms of like trying to solve problems using crowds. And then I agree that
the wisdom of
there.
crowd is basically free people interacting with each other without any sort of order or hierarchy.
Right. It only works
but
if
when
the
you-
individuals act independently of each
Indeed.
other.
Yeah, but exactly. And
So
as soon as you
SRC
give,
is not a good-
as soon
a
as
good
you give
example of
as soon as you give, I'm just saying literal experiences I've had of people trying to run 100% democracies. And because they want to say everything goes to a vote and there's 9 people on a committee. So everything's about who got 5 and who got 4 and the 5 wins, even if that's a stupid decision. And the person who's ultimately in charge as the chair or whatever it is should have said, no, we're not going that way because I can see the outcome is going to be a negative one. So look, I think that's a system within which we run. Is it the best system? I don't know. I'm a bit Winston Churchill on that.
Is it the best mass delusion? Is the better phrase.
Well, I mean, on my view, it's anarchist right now. It's just we don't know that. So it's one of many potential delusions, as you say. And the question is it the best one? I do, like I've painted pictures in my books of potential futuristic societies that I think could be better than a democracy. They're anarchist societies. So they're societies where there is no governing body. And there's problems with anarchism. One of them is the distribution of resources. How do you trade? And so I solve that in my books with kind of Star Trek technology, so 3D printers. So in Star Trek, they've got replicators that can just generate whatever. And they've created a post-capitalist society in Star Trek where it's more of a socialist society, but without distributing resources, because everyone has a replicator, so everyone has infinite resources.
But there's no exploitation of people in making those resources.
No, there's no working class.
Exactly.
Because there's nothing to work for. You can replicate. So I think a replicator / 3D printer is the solution to that problem. There's other problems.
Unicorn here, but yes.
Well, at least 3D printers are now much more advanced than they were. Replicator was a magical thing 50 years ago, but now it's not.
To an extent, I mean, you still need to have an input into a replicator. Needs no input. A replicator can just create things from the atoms of the air, which is theoretically impossible because it violates thermodynamics and destruction and creation of energy. But 3D printers don't. That's because you're putting something. They need ink, or they need plastic, or they need rubber, or whatever.
But theoretically, the stuff that you would give them is so much cheaper or more abundant than normal resources would be. Than a spanner, for example. The stuff that you put in the printer to print a spanner is much more readily available than the spanner. And so it makes things cheaper and more readily available.
I don't want to get too bogged down into
Sure, we can talk about this.
Because he's not a nerd.
No, I'm not. I don't watch. I try to watch Star Trek once. It's fucking awful. It's worse than Star Wars.
We can do a separate podcast. It's you and I.
It's worse than Star Wars, and that's saying
no, nothing's worse than Star Wars.
Especially the latest trilogy.
Twilight is.
Yeah, it might be.
But my final question, because it's 6:30 on a Friday evening, and I have an imaginary wife to go home to, an imaginary
child, and an imaginary house. Actually,
no, the house does exist.
House exists.
Well, it's not
you
yours.
just don't own it. So you see why libertarians don't like this?
Yes, I do actually. That's why I renounced my libertarianism a while ago. But now the problem with your view, not the problem with your view, the problem is no one will actually, very few will actually go in step with you.
Yes.
And not being part of the delusion leads to negative utility anyway.
Yeah, it very, very well might. People might be more unhappy.
No, but for yourself personally.
Yeah.
You as Jason,
I would be happier
delusion.
if I was deluded. Yeah.
Yeah, but you are not deluded because you still take part in the delusion of paying taxes and using money and whatever.
Practically you're saying, yeah.
In a practical sense. Yeah. So what is the actual effect of someone being completely and utterly convinced by your argument and wanting to live it in good faith?
Yeah, it might be that my motivations for things are different. When I stop at a red robot, I stop because if I were to go through it, there's a good chance I'll cause an accident. I don't stop at the red robot because I think that it's right to stop at the red robot or wrong to go through it. So my motivations for things are different, but my behavior might almost always be identical to someone who obeys laws and, does things that the state says you should do. I have relationships with people. I do all the things that people do. My reasons for doing them would be different.
Right. And are different reasons sufficient to have that view? How can I explain? Is it worth your while
all the chatter,
to pursue this, basically? Because I'm fully on board with you, but
just lie down in the vat and enjoy the dopamine, man.
But like day to day, you cannot put it into any real practice or any sense of real.
Not in the system we have.
No, I go to the shop to buy coffee.
Still have to take your credit card along.
Yeah. And I still have to drive there and whatever and speak to the cashier who's not actually a cashier. It's a person, but we just call her or him a cashier. It just makes life a lot more difficult. So you just follow common practice, really.
That's true. I mean, you're absolutely right that it has very few pragmatic effects because everyone believes this. But now, just imagine the equivalent argument was used about the flat Earth. So whether you believe the Earth's round or flat, does it change your life in any way? Here's another one. whether you believe that the solar system exists as the only thing that exists, or whether you think that there's other stars and planets around them, does it change what you do on a day-to-day basis in any way? Or does it change your behavior in any way on a day-to-day basis, whether we go and explore Mars? Unless you're the person going to explore Mars, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But we do still think it's important to go and explore Mars and send up satellites and explore the universe and do stuff and explore and expand our knowledge. Not because it's pragmatic, not because it has a pragmatic benefit or any difference, but just because it's important to expand our knowledge. And I think by doing my PhD, I was expanding my own knowledge about whether I'm part of groups. I don't think I am.
I think that's a good way to end. I had a final thing, but I'm going to leave it because that was great.
Oh, you got a soundbite. I'm glad.
All right, Jason, where can we find your work? I've read some of it. I like it a lot, especially Defragmenting Daniel. I think it was a great series. Yeah, there was 3 books, I believe.
That's right. Now there's 10. So Defragmenting Daniel was a 3-book series.
You've been wasting your time voting.
Yeah, you could have been reading.
I can do both at once.
Yeah, so I expanded it into a universe called the Bubble universe. And the Bubble universe, the first book is called Defragmenting Daniel. And the first 3 books are all about Daniel, but the next 7 are about all sorts of other characters within that universe.
And one just has to look at your name on Amazon and everything's there.
So everything that I write is on Amazon. If you go onto Amazon and you search for Jason Werbeloff, that's Werbeloff, you can find all my stuff.
Or you can just read his name in the show notes and copy and paste it into Amazon as well.
Much easier. Yeah, much easier. It's an impossible surname. Thank you very much for the plug. I appreciate it.
Oh, no. The pleasure's mine. Jason, it's always a pleasure having you. We should actually have... Do you want to start a podcast?
Well, we did. So,
we're not allowed to talk about that other podcast.
No, but Ramon and I started a podcast. So we recorded a podcast years ago with a third friend of ours.
True.
Yeah, it's called Unconvinced, if anyone's interested.
It's still around.
Yeah, it's still around.
You convinced me that circumcision was good. And now I actually think it's terrible now.
Really? You changed your mind?
Based on new evidence.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And you did another one which you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
We won't talk about why I'm not
which has
allowed to
never
talk
been
about
released. But yeah, I mean, some interesting ideas. Give us some feedback on the show if you enjoyed this podcast.
No, but sorry, before we end, Jason and listeners, Renegade Report wants to expand. We want new shows on the platform. And
I see.
You know, so if you are interested, Jason,
No, I
or,
would be, yeah,
listeners, but really, I don't want something about fucking millennial buying habits and hip hop. I don't care about that shit. Like if you are like if you're good at something or you an expert in something, you know, email us about a potential podcast. But Jason, I think someone like you, an hour monologue a week or every 2 weeks about a certain topic could be worth your while.
We can talk philosophy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, good. I don't think you want to be found anywhere else. Is that correct?
No,
I mean,
that's
nothing
about
else
it.
exists really.
No, not even Amazon, but he wants to be found on that.
Yes,
Just
you don't
on
want to be found
Amazon, yeah.
But,
Thank you both for
those
having
of
me.
you who think Twitter exists, at Roman Kabanak, at Renegade_report, and myself at Jonathan_Witt. You can find us on Facebook, the page and the group. I don't know how many times we need to tell you. Go to the website, renegadereport.co.za. Please donate towards the show. Yeah. We're trying to do a whole bunch of things, including fix my voice. Shirts are available. Ramon, his whole house is just, you know, that place he lives with his non-wife. It's just shirts everywhere.
Just
They're
boxes.
all over the place. So please, buy some shirts. No, if you want one, that are available on the website. As always, we always appreciate you listening. And if someone hasn't yet moved over stream and you know that they used to listen, but they can't find the podcast anymore, we're not on the old platform. They've got to search Renegade Media, click the download button, subscribe, and you'll get us weekly. We're fixing the Spotify problem. We're getting there. Thanks so much as always. Catch you next time. Cheers.